Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us at Pegasus Springs for our third module, part three of Reconnecting for the year ahead. It is a true pleasure to have you with us today for this little brief moment in time. Thank you for taking a moment and stepping out of your busy days. We know it's crazy out there, so thanks for taking a moment to spend some time with us. I'm Sara Burd. I'm going to be one of your hosts for today. And with me is Marlene Lifshin, and we'll take a moment and introduce ourselves. Marlene, why don't you share who you are and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Marlene Lifshin, and I currently work in Reading as a school adjustment counselor, and I work in a middle school.
Wonderful. And as I mentioned, I'm Sara Burd, and I'm the Director of Social Emotional Learning and Counseling in the Arlington Public Schools. And I did have the pleasure, though, once of working with Marlene, and that was a real treat. So it's awesome to be reunited again, even though it is only in the virtual sense. It's great to be with you. So we have the wonderful opportunity to be zooming into your classroom, your office, your phone, your home, whatever it might be today, to talk about reconnecting for the year ahead, specifically about a topic that's really important to both Marlene and myself, and that is of self-care and collective care. And specifically with a focus on educator reflection and how that's necessary in a moment like this and how it is critical for really transforming cultures. So, first, as we mentioned, our host here is Pegasus Springs, and we want to take a moment to acknowledge the mission of Pegasus Springs. And that really, if you are connected to them, you're pretty familiar with them, but they want to transform education to be more equitably engaging all students in their learning. We want to align with expectations for the 21st century. And they really truly believe that by connecting educators, students, and parents, and by supporting opportunities for collaboration and learning, the goal is to support change that positively impacts our schools, our communities, and our nation. So thank you to Pegasus Springs for bringing us together, bringing Erin and David Walsh together earlier for part one and part two, and bringing this really nice 5-module series to everybody as an opportunity to help us reopen our schools with some really nice resources. Okay, 46%. Why? Well, a couple of years ago, a Gallup poll across the country decided to reach out and find out in the United States of America, we have all of these professions that are really varying in their amount of stress, varying in their amount of demand and duress on the physical body, on the mental and emotional body, on the psyche. And you always hear these stories about, what's the hardest job to have? Is it harder to be a doctor with people's lives on the line, lawyer to have all of these crazy hours and the intensity of the work? You hear people talk about dentists have it the hardest because nobody likes them. And then what about air traffic controllers? Because they have such precision that they need to be aware of, and the intensity of their work that they focus on. Well, in the Gallup poll that was just most recently done, they found that educators reported that 46% of the field in the industry of education reported that they were chronically burnt out and stressed 46% of the time. I'm sorry, 46% of the teaching staff said that they were chronically and burnt out and stressed all of the time. So that's half of our industry. That's half of our colleagues. If we were to turn around at a staff meeting or look at a list of all of our colleagues and say, how many of you are excited to be here? Theoretically, half of us are feeling chronically stressed and burnt out to the point where it's difficult to do our job. It's difficult to be there and to show up. And why is that remarkable? Because 46% was tied with two professions for the number one most stressed out position in the entire United States. And if you were to guess, you might pick from some of those others I just gave you, it would be nurses. So teachers and nurses tied for first place for the most chronically stressed out and burnt out professions in the entire United States. More so than dentists, more so than doctors, more so than police and law enforcement, more so than many other stressful professions. It's education. Tied for first, for the worst. Oh my goodness, that was a wake up call. And this was long before we were in the current circumstances that we're in right now. So when we think about that, that's my motivation. That's what brings me to the work about adult self-care, about adult collective care, and about educator reflection. That we have to know that going into this work and supporting our students, we can't rely on a teaching staff that's feeling, roughly half of our teaching staff is feeling that they're just cooked. They're cooked before they even walk in the door. We definitely aren't going to be able to do what we need to do for our kids if that's the case. So we have to do something different. So back in March, when all of our schools were closing and everything was starting to shut down, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence did a bit of a survey with educators, and they wanted to find out how educators were feeling. And so they asked them to share all these different feeling words. Tell us how you're feeling. What are you experiencing? And you'll notice from the Wordle, the collection, the cloud of words on the left-hand side, that this is how educators were feeling. Mostly, what do we notice? Anxiety. Holy moly, lots of anxiety. And then around that, stressed, worried, uncertainty, frustrated, overwhelmed, sad, fear, with a little bit sprinkled in of hope, a little bit of gratefulness, teeny tiny happiness over the E, a little bit of love next to the fear, getting even smaller and smaller. So there are some little pieces of optimism in there, but clearly overwhelmed by all of the difficult and unpleasant emotional feeling states. Then about a month or so ago, the same survey was sent out by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and they asked teachers how they anticipate they're going to be feeling in the new school year, which is right now, this moment in time, where I know many of our schools are opening, or by the time that you're getting a chance to take a look at this, perhaps you've been open for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. But how do you anticipate you'll be feeling when school's opening? And this is how educators reported that they anticipated feeling. I don't see a big difference between the left and the right. I don't know about you, but they seem pretty darn similar. Anxiety is that overwhelming feeling state. Overwhelmed, frustrated, worried, nervous, stressed, scared, fearful, concerned, uneasy, apprehensive, unsure, uncomfortable, exhausted. Yep, and a little bit of excited, hopeful, a little bit of, is there anything else optimistic in there? Relieved, like maybe we'll finally be moving forward again, but a lot of concerning words. But then you ask educators, okay, this is how you anticipate feeling, and this is how you have been feeling. How would you like to feel? What feeling states are desirable? And this is how educators report that they would like to feel. And so just take a second and look at those words. I feel like I can breathe easier just taking those words in. Excited, confident, safe, happy, supported, calm, energized, prepared, respected, motivated, calm, supported, secure, connected, hopeful. Teachers don't want to feel anxious. They don't want to feel disconnected. They don't want to feel stressed and overwhelmed. They want to feel confident and excited. And the nice thing that's really fascinating to notice about this is that really, truly, if you look back at that first slide, anxiety and uncertainty compared to confidence and excitement, those are different feeling states and ways of approaching circumstances. But really, truly, educator reflection is the way to come at the same circumstances and be able to approach them and achieve some different feeling states. So thinking back to what Erin and Dave talked about and how our stressed minds really don't allow us to come to places of learning. Thinking about how for our students, their brains don't allow them to get to a place of reason until they're first really regulated and relating to other people in the community. It's the same thing for adults. And it's the same thing for all of our brains. It's not something you ever grow out of, right? So if you're in a, think about this feeling state. If you're stressed and anxious and uncertain and feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, you're not being creative. You're not reaching out and building community. You're not overextending yourself and taking risks. What you're doing is you're retreating and you're playing it safe and you're curling up into survival. And what educators really want to do is to feel confident, and they want to feel excited and happy, and they do want to be connected, and they do want to reach out. And so how can we, this is our charge, how do we create spaces in our communities that help to move educators away from that stressed out place to a place where they feel it's safe to come out of that protective shell, to a place where they feel like it's safe to reach out and connect and build community. And even though they might not have all the answers, and even though it's going to be an incredibly unpredictable year with things that they've never experienced before, we can go into it with some confidence and with some excitement. And how can we support them to do that? And that's what today's module is about. How can we create these opportunities where adults can connect and they can heal and they can build their capacity to support students? That's today. So this slide outlines for us the CASEL roadmap to reopening schools. Now, CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And they have put out a gorgeous, gorgeous roadmap to give schools and building leaders and even classroom teachers and direct service providers some robust skills, but also resources and guidelines and anything you can imagine to really turn to if you're thinking about what kind of things and what kind of tools do I have in my toolbox for reopening schools. And they try to keep it pretty straightforward in that, look, there are just 4 different things we need to make sure we hit in order to reopen schools. The first thing is that we need to cultivate and deepen our relationships, build our partnerships, and plan for social emotional learning. We got to reach out to families, reach out to communities, really talk about how important it is to put health and well-being of human beings, whether they're adults, students, families, everybody first. It's the only way we're going to get to learning. Secondly, we need to design these opportunities for adults to come together. Third, we're then going to create the safe and supportive, equitable learning environments for all of our students' social emotional development. And then the fourth is we're going to use our data as a way to share the power, deepen relationships, and improve continuously in these continuous improvement cycles, right? For all of our students, families, and staff to make sure that we're not disproportionately skewing any of our academics, any of our discipline, anything along those lines. So very simply, if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll notice that 2 comes before 3. Well, that's a no-brainer. Of course, 2 comes before 3. Pause for a second. Adults come before focusing on the students. Why is that so important? CASEL has been working with a number of major districts, also a number of states through their Collaborating States initiative. And in late 2019, they put out some fascinating findings from all of their implementation research. And what did they find? They found that in districts and in large schools where they had prioritized and put 3 before 2, where they focused on student learning environments and student social emotional learning before really securing the staff social emotional learning environments, things were not taking root. They needed to stop and slow down and rewind and come back to refoster those environments so that they were safe for adults again and root down once more. So much so that I like to joke about it playfully with my own teams and colleagues that the brief that came out last year was basically like a whoops, we goofed. 2 comes before 3, we forgot. so that we really have to make sure when we're moving forward, we don't skip two. In service of serving students, what we tend to often do is skip two and just go straight to three. We cannot do that here. If we do that, we're going to miss it completely. If we go straight to trying to serve students and their social emotional needs, our entire, remember that 46%, our entire staff are not going to be in a place where they're able to support and hold the very critical work that needs to be done for reopening schools and for supporting the dynamic, ever-changing needs that are going to come along with this remote, hybrid, COVID, post-COVID world that our students are trying to learn and socialize and grow up during and through. We have to be able to, as adults, find and create spaces where we can connect and heal and build our own capacity to weather this, grow through it, be creative, problem solve, so that we can then hold the space for our students to be able to do that as well. Okay, so two comes before three. To that end, in our local district in Arlington, we were putting together, okay, so what do some of that steps look like for us? And there were just some 4 recommendations from the Castle Plan around, here's some space for connecting and healing among adults. You want to make sure that adults have access to mental health and trauma support, if that's what's necessary, but continue to also identify opportunities for innovation and anti-racist practices. And are we embedding our professional learning? So we're not always going to get the luxury of full-on professional learning days, but additionally, those aren't always the best for continued learning. We need to embed it within our daily practices so that it's something that can become more sustainable. So for us, we created these plans that are really customized to our own local district, but we used our employee assistant program to reach out and to let folks know, hey, you have access to mental health supports should you need them. We partnered with a local mindfulness app to be able to offer Wise at Work, which is really an awesome opportunity for our staff to have some mindfulness apps available on their phone and different trainings that they can go to. But there's plenty of them that are available for free for folks to use. There's also plenty of online modules for continued professional learning. And so we linked a number of those for folks to take a look at. And so think about, for your own district, what might be some ways that you can design opportunities where staff can connect and heal and build their own capacity. Outside of these types of supports, we wanted to also offer and share with you a way that perhaps you could create some healing and connection space for your staff. And this is really going to fall under collective care. In our American culture and in our Western world, we've really coined that term self-care quite a lot, right? We hear people talk about self-care, and it's become this whole industry. What we're noticing, and this language here is from the Department of Education and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Massachusetts. And what we've talked about is that self-care can be a bit exclusive when we're talking about all of our cultures, ethnicities, heritages that our students and our families come from. A lot of our communities find their homes much more on the collective care side of this continuum. They find that they are nourished and they are rejuvenated by collective, more group-oriented restorative practices. So being a part of a community, being part of home, being part of a church, or being part of the community center down the road, those are the kinds of things in the collective care, the sense of caring for other and building up your small knit community is what's much more important to and nourishing to individuals there, as opposed to individual self-care where folks are a bit more isolated. And so what we want to do is encourage folks to think about self-care as a part of this larger collective care and how we need to treat both of them as complementary elements of educator care. And so with that, there's an activity that we can introduce and bring into schools, quite simple, just a way to facilitate some conversation and reflection that's going to allow Either you as a school leader, ideally, that would be the best place where this could take root. If you're viewing this and you're not a school leader, perhaps this is something you can bring to your team, bring it to your department head, a director, and ask to make some space for this on a regular basis. I'm going to pause here, and Marlene is going to walk us through what this activity might look like. Marlene?
Thanks, Sarah. So as Sarah pointed out, there's certainly a lot of things that are getting in the way of us taking care of ourselves, but that is really so important. If we want to take care of our students, we have to take care of ourselves. So hopefully this activity will help with people being self-aware and also to take care of themselves. So there's a graphic that I'm going to explain. Um, some of you might be familiar with comfort zone, growth, and panic zone. And so this is low risk zone, which is your comfort zone where you feel most comfortable. It's under safety still. Medium risk is taking a little step out into growth. And high risk still is in safety, but you're taking that giant step. Panic is the red. And in panic zone, as Sarah pointed out, we don't learn. We're not going to be able to attend. We're not going to be able to focus. We're in that fight or flight or freeze mode. So this activity is designed for people to figure out with different prompts where they might be at. So for me, panic might look like my heart might be racing, my voice might be shaking. I tend to get migraines, so that would be my panic. So I did this activity with the staff here where I work at Coolidge, and we used the stamps in Zoom, and people placed where they were at with the different prompts. So there's a series of prompts on the next slide, which you can use, you can add to, you can take some things away. You could do this activity very differently. You could take the graphic and have people identify where they might be at, or you could just on the screen, online, have people place a stamp where they're at. And I think it's really important to see the whole spectrum of where people are at. So for me, what might be a medium risk might be somebody's panic zone. So, you know, wearing a mask for an extended period of time, for example. Being in a classroom. Online teaching. That would put me in panic. Going to the doctors or dentist. Eating in a restaurant. So these are some examples that you can ask. After the activity, it's really important to reflect and debrief. So what we had people do is take a few minutes, and I always like for people to journal. And since March, what types of experiences have put you in low, medium, high risk? What types of experiences have put you in the panic zone? Have these experiences changed throughout this period? The self-care part, what has helped you in these uncertain times? When you think about returning to school, what will help you? How can people support one another? What are you going to need? So establishing group norms and following a protocol. And we followed the protocol of, we broke out into Zoom groups, and we followed the protocol where everyone had an opportunity to speak for 2 minutes, but also to listen. So it's perspective taking, which was really, I think is very important to do that, because it's really important to set some guidelines and follow those guidelines and establish norms so that people can feel comfortable to share, but also to listen to other people and to lean into the work that hopefully people can do this year.
And at the start of the activity, Marlene has the norms and protocols suggested on slide 10, which of course could be personalized for any existing norms or agreements that your community has as well.
Yep. So again, like, the reasons why we debrief is it's important for people to be able to use their voice, to feel empowered, and to lean into the work. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in our world today in regards to social emotional and taking care of ourselves, being aware, um, and just having those difficult conversations. And so hopefully the shift can go from a trauma sensitive school to a healing centered approach, which again we'll be talking about in module 4.
Beautiful segue, Marlene. Love it. So that hopefully gives you a good context for, once we really wrap our heads around what David and Erin Walsh were talking about in terms of the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences and how neurologically what's happening at the cellular level, in our brains and in our bodies, how that's going to show up in our learning spaces and in our socializing spaces, how that impacts us as adults, as professional colleagues, and how we have an obligation to create spaces for adults. And it's an obligation to our kids to create spaces for the adults to be able to do this work if we're really going to have a culture that allows us to move from being a trauma sensitive culture to a healing centered culture, a healing centered learning environment. And that is what module 4 is going to be all about. So with that being said, I leave us with this Gregory S. Williams quote that I think is apropos for the moment in time. On the other side of a storm is the strength that comes from having navigated through it. So raise your sail and begin. Thank you tremendously for spending your time with us, and we will see you again soon. Take care.